The Todoroki family has been a slow-burning development throughout the series of My Hero Academia. It is widely agreed to be, if not one of the best, side stories in the entire show. The introduction from its golden child to the consequently #1 hero father. To be given pieces of this destructive family early on, a son refusing to use his father's powers because of how he was raised, and a mother's trauma affecting her children. A father's determination and hard work only placed him on the heels of the original #1 hero, and never really being able to legitimately surpass his competition. These puzzle pieces start to come together when one major piece sits open in the middle, a representation of the emptiness within the family portrait. The eventual reveal of Dabi being the eldest son of the Todoroki family is near excellent storytelling. Believe what you want about My Hero, but the Todoroki family storyline is phenomenal to say the least. From the symbolism of the family's powers to the anatomy of its members in its fictional world, there is a connection that feels so floored for any of us with rivaling siblings or strict parents can relate. In today's video, I want to speak on behalf of yet another anime villain. Just like in my last video released centuries ago, I would like to shine a psychological light on another character that requires some justification for his actions, and exactly why he ends up in this story in the position that he does. To better dissect the dichotomy of the Todoroki family, I believe it's best to analyze the tree from 3 different members: Shoto, Rei, and Enji. These characters will then transition us to the eventual rise of Dabi. First, we're going to talk about Shoto and Rei collectively, the golden child, younger brother of Dabi, and his broken mother. Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychotherapist, states in his birth order theory that the more children born, the eldest child is dethroned in the hierarchy of importance and attention. With an arranged quirk marriage, a father aims to have a child with both fire and ice quirks to eventually trump his own fire quirk in levels of raw power to become the #1 hero. Rei is forced into this position of an arranged marriage due to coming from a financially struggling family and a submissive father, one trait that she will eventually develop as well. The firstborn is Toya, with only the raw fire quirk inherited from his father. Enji tries again with his wife, in hopes for his next child to wield both parental powers of fire and ice. With the birth of his next couple children, Natsuo and Fuyumi, they only yield ice powers and have no desire to be heroes. A desperate Enji decides to try again. With a father leading the household, Rei accepts her submissive role. This role is obviously seen in her children, by witnessing their own parents' form of abuse. The spawn of parental expectations and disappointments on a genuine child looking for love from both mother and father frustrates a desperate Toya. All the while, with Enji wanting to keep trying for their golden child, Rei never really steps in to console Toya, out of fear of speaking out. A rageful young Toya merely looks for affirmation from his father that always turns a blind eye on him, decides that all he needs is his fire quirk to prove how powerful he is. Referring back to Adler's theory, a dethroned importance of the eldest son Toya forces him in a corner of dedicating his youth to being noticed and loved by his father, a man he innately looks up to. Having a mother that never steps in and defends him, Toya is again backed into a corner. Rei has a passive nature, possibly due out of fear for her husband, and accepting her woman role in her marriage. Her family needed money, so she was set up to marry her husband. As a result, this repressed woman deals with her own family issues, and the ones to reap the burden are her children. Toya is then in the middle of both his mother and father's submissiveness and blind dedication, respectively. Both parents are required to face reality. Enji's ego and arrogance, to put his own aspirations above his own kin, is detrimental to the proper nurturing of a child. Again, the dethroned attention is more critical when even the submissive mother watches as a bystander. Think, if you aren't part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Eventually, when the golden child Shoto is born on the 4th try, 100% of the attention goes to him immediately. Finally, Enji gets his wish. A child born with fire and ice quirks together can finally become the #1 hero, at the cost of his eldest, neglected and ignored. At this point, Shoto is treated differently, not being able to play with others, protected because nothing can harm his growth. Toya becomes frustrated and sees the direct attention that he has always yearned for given to Shoto. As a result, Toya decides to go all in on his training for his fire quirk, proving to himself and his father that he doesn't need ice to be noticed. His fire quirk is naturally more powerful than his father's. His fire turns a bright blue during puberty, giving Toya the spark and motivation he needs to go all in. The reason his fire is blue is literally because it burns more. The reason his fire burns blue, think of the base of a fire being blue, and as it turns outward, we see that orangish yellow color that we're all used to seeing. The issue here is that Toya did in fact inherit his mother's genes. Toya's body can't withstand the fire that he produces, having a low tolerance to the temperature his body produces. This genius decision from a writing standpoint manifests in him literally growing scars from neglect. A child so dedicated to becoming noticed, he trains against his body's inability to take what he does to prove himself. We then see Toya train in isolation, developing scars and burns. The silver lining here is that he does get some attention, whether that be negative or positive. In psychology, positive and negative do not necessarily mean the same thing as mathematics. Positive and negative reinforcement is the response given to a certain action or behavior. For Toya, he positively receives the attention that he so yearns for, but at the cost of his own body. As a result, Toya continues training. Motivated by the small ounces of attention, he continues training, and on a fateful day, Toya perishes from overexerting himself. Next, we will touch on the father. Dedicated and guided by his own goals, his motivation influences every aspect of himself. From his own personality all the way down to his kids, his family suffers the after effects of blind dedication and stubbornness. The hunger to become the #1 hero, he plans for himself to make it. If and when that isn't enough, he shall make his descendants surpass him with the combination of his powerful quirk combined with his one weakness. He then arranges a quirk marriage to create the vision that he has. While working to surpass All Might, the #1 hero, he ignores his disappointment of the first son Toya, simply because he didn't inherit the ice quirk. He's a disappointment, right? As stated before, Toya deals with this backlash the most in being the eldest. As adults, we have the cognitive ability to cope with failure. Although it may not be healthy or even correct at times, we cope nonetheless as adults with a fully functioning brain. For a child, they simply don't have the cognitive ability to cope. They innately yearn for certain things such as attention and nurturing love from parents at the very least. They may not know why, but it would make sense for a mother and father to love and raise. For Toya, he doesn't know how to handle this neglect and eventually slips through the cracks of siblings to come after him. For his father's blinding ambition is both a trait picked up by Toya and a form of neglect, and this forces him into his boiling point. As parents, the nurturance of accepting your child as they are is healthy for development. A child is not a carbon copy of their parents. They may not have the same goals and aspirations of their father and mother, but that should not affect how they're treated. Once Shoto is born, Endeavor feels that his prayers have been answered. Putting all of his focus and dedication into his fourth child spawns the neglect to the other children. The same dedication to training that he does as a grown man goes to this adolescent, a child that knows nothing other than training. No fun, no connection with his siblings, no nurturance outside of learning how to hone his skills. This eventually pushes Shoto away to not wanting to use his fire powers at all. The field of psychology is a new science that is pretty malleable due to its adolescence. Therefore, some terms are coined and advanced the more they are researched. An example is a relatively new term, a tiger mom. Coined by Amy Chua, a professor at Yale, is a strict parenting style that often neglects emotional support for an influenced drive to work harder. This authoritarian parenting style often results in detrimental effects of emotional and social development. The high expectation instills discipline to achieve more, yes, but reduces the ability to socialize, cope with emotions, and sometimes twists the outlook on success. A sometimes out of reach level of success or simply failure can result in depression and overall low self-esteem for a growing child. For Toya, he was seen as a failure. This resulted in his dedication to find another way for attention, resulting in his scars. He trained strenuously. After seeing his youngest brother receive all of the attention and training, he eventually lost his life and donned the new moniker, Dabi. The birth of Dabi represents the trauma in later years. His scars remain with him like many emotional scars that we all carry within us as we grow up. In the hierarchy of needs by Maslow, there is a reason for self-actualization being above the rest of our needs. For love and belonging begins with our parents. Without the nurturing aspect of raising a child, a juvenile mind can run rampant and make choices that are detrimental to their own growth. How can you blame them? They're only children. Another view on self-actualization from a skewed vision of a highly expecting parent is the inability for an individual child to even realize what they really want. I then beg the question, what if Dabi was never influenced to want to become a hero? Would he become the passionate villain that we know now? The beautiful storytelling in My Hero, the manifestation of emotional scars given by traumatic neglect and expectation, is literally shown on our beloved characters. Toya receives scars since he was young, merely desiring to be noticed by his father. He trains and trains to be noticed and loved, only to be disappointed when his father focuses on his youngest brother. Him being prone to burns and being naturally more powerful than his father is the ironic twist of fate of his father's aspirations. For a father's only goal is to raise his son better than him. But in this universe, he isn't exactly what he wanted. He doesn't believe that he's enough to become the #1 hero. Dabi is figuratively a lesson for Endeavor. You wanted a perfect son, and you got one. He is stronger than you. This is what you wanted. But as a result, you reap what you sow. In this arranged marriage, that's what you wanted. Dabi would and could be stronger than his father with just his fire powers, and he could have not inherited the gene to restrict his power from his mother. For Shoto, he receives a lone face mark because he's the end of a line of neglect, trauma, and high expectation. The first battle between Shoto and Dabi, with their father so shocked that he couldn't move, only to watch as his golden child loses to his eldest neglected son, is perfectly humbling. Finally, in episode 130, we see the Todoroki family finally understand their flaws. They are finally ready to face the reality of their respective positions in this hellish family. Endeavor realizes to become the #1 hero, he needs to and can rely on his family. Being vulnerable does not represent weakness, but trust. Rei realizes her role in being a bystander. She gains the strength to stand up to her husband, who treated her children and herself with so much belittlement. She finally stands up for herself and her children as a mother should. Shoto is confident within himself to take the role of the golden child and understands what it took to get there, what his siblings went through, and what his mother went through. He forgives his father's selfish ways, and finally, the Todoroki family can face the traumatic result of their eldest, Dabi. For myself, this family dichotomy really touches home. I was raised in a strict household. I was introduced to football at the early ages of 3 and forced to play when I was 4. I was trained in the sport extremely. I remember my first game where I fumbled. I was forced to walk around the house after the game with the ball in hand. My father would come up and try to slap it out, and if he succeeded, I was forced to do push-ups. My offensive coordinator came over later that day and did the same thing. I had to hold on to the ball all day, even in my sleep. Yes. They came into my room as I slept, and I still had to keep a firm grip. The high expectation caused the reverse effect, removing the passion of being involved in the sport 100%. I've always wanted to write scripts, YouTube videos, honestly whatever I could get my hands on it, and eventually it would lead into film. At the time, if it wasn't football, it didn't matter. I could have turned out like Dabi and became a reckless teenager, or even dedicated my life to be the best football player I wanted to be, regardless if I personally wanted to or not. In conclusion, the Todoroki family can teach many of us what not to do as parents, how to properly nurture, and what facing the truth comes with. The release from lies and egos can bring us together and allow us to listen to one another. We can support loved ones as they pursue their dreams in a proper way without neglect. We can listen to our children and allow them an opinion in a respectable way. Overall, the warning of Dabi is what makes him such a beloved villain. The empathy of being a victim of neglect, not knowing how to cope, and lashing out in a hopeful way, he represents a side of us that we hope we never see come out of ourselves. And that is a pretty justifiable take on the coolest looking villain in the paranormal liberation front. Sincerely, Will.